delayed by almost an hour, so I request the organizers to respect the value of time for every speaker that comes here to speak, because we've all sparing a lot of time, taking time out and coming here to speak. So I request the organizers next time to bear in mind the timing. Yeah, so with that, I'll just start with the presentation. And this is about alternative financing solutions for smart cities. Smart cities, there are various approaches to smart cities. So one is the top-down approaches, which is where cities actually invest a whole lot of capital on cities connecting the ICT infrastructure, etc. This is an example of, I'll be looking at global best practices of smart cities and alternative financing solutions which have been practiced globally. So if you look at the Mazda city, UAE, they spent about $30 billion for this construction of the ICT infrastructure for this city alone. The next example of a top-down approach for smart city is the Rio De Janeiro in Brazil, which is a city control center which was constructed. I would like some more attention, please. Everybody's, there's hardly any crowd, and then everybody's on the phone, and only inaugural session attendance, it's not correct, Yeah. So Rio de Janeiro city control centers were constructed in Brazil, and this is again a heavy investment infrastructure, which is about $4 billion of investment, which was spent by the city of Brazil. This is again a top-down approach, a command and control center approach, top-down approach for smart cities. And another example of a top-down approach is big data analysis, which was done by Seoul in South Korea, where they actually generated heat maps and they actually populated the hubs for employment in the entire city of Seoul. That's again another top-down approach example of smart cities. And another example of a smart city, those were the top-down approaches. So we could also look at a smart city as a collaborative solution, not just a top-down approach. So if you see a collaborative approach is where, as we all know, where the government, the private sector, and the civil society and the academia all together come under one platform as a level playing field. So that's another example of a smart city which is more workable and less capital intensive. So here we have an example of the accelerators and incubators which were set up in the New York City. This actually generated about $6 billion of economic growth in the city of New York. So this is a low capital intensive but a collaborative approach for smart cities. So can I request the audience to kindly pay attention? Those of you who are engaged in conversations, can you take it offline, please? So so this is another collaborative approach which was adopted in the New York City. And this kind of approaches are also being adopted in India today. For example, in India also we have a lot of co-working spaces which have been set up, and which is again low capital intensive but much more effective in terms of their utility. Spain is another example of collaborative approach, which is an open challenge method, which was done through an online methodology, where so this is again another solution where you can invite public participation through online digital platforms. City Sense is again another it's a platform that has been floated by World Bank to invite ideas from citizens for participating in the smart city, the solutions, in providing solutions for smart cities. So these are some of the top-down and the collaborative approaches of smart cities. It's just to sensitize you on various approaches to smart cities, top-down as well as collaborative. So if we come to the point of citizens are actually in the urban space today, the challenge is that citizens demand increasing services while authorities and local bodies are starved of funds. So if you look at coming back to India, the situation is also very similar, where all our municipal corporations are reeling under negative surpluses and they're falling way below the Zakaria committee norms in terms of per capita provision of service delivery. So this is mainly attributed to the low level of autonomy that the municipalities and municipal corporations have in terms of spending the money that's being devolved through the 14 finance commissions, etc. So we've had a huge devolution of funds through the 14th and 15th Finance Commission, but the spending that, if you just reflect on the spending, most of it has gone to rural development. Almost 1.6% has gone into rural development, and very less on urban development, just 0.7% has gone into urban development. So which again goes on to show that perhaps the hand-holding that is being given for urban development may be less than what is being given for rural development, because I'm aware that the Ministry of Panchayati Raj and the Ministry of Rural Development is actually going very aggressive on 74th Amendment and implementing it in letter and spirit and providing a lot of hand-holding services for preparation of Gram Panchayat development plans, etc. So a similar approach has to be done for smart cities also. Of course, at the ministry level, we have solutions, we have teams that are being set up at the central government level. But at the state government level, of course, we have various smart city SPVs being set up, but that's again not actually cutting across to the functionaries. So there's a separation between the functionaries and the SPVs. So SPVs remain an isolated lot of professionals, not really interacting so much, and there's not much of knowledge transfer happening to the municipal functionaries per se. So the solution becomes, remains stagnant. Once this SPV is dissolved, then the municipalities again grapple and they don't know what to do with all these funds and how to prepare effective development plans for utilizing these funds. So yeah, so if again going back to some international best practices, I'll just toggle between international and national. So if you go back and look at some of the international examples of generating finances that world over local bodies have done successfully, we'll just give a quick overview. Typically, these are subsidies which in India, which today is becoming quite effective subsidies where you have direct beneficiary transfer and a lot of devolution to the urban local bodies. So that's becoming more and more effective today in India. Then, of course, bonds. Bonds is something that we have just started experimenting. It's still a nascent market, but there are very innovative methods of generating bonds, which we just have a quick look at how some of the counties in the US have done this successfully, and which we can replicate. International need not always be wrong or misplaced. You know, we can always learn from international best practices, although we realize the scale and diversity of India is very different, etc. But still there are learnings that we can take from international best practices. So the various development exaction tools also, which is actually what the developers pay in kind, not really in cash, and how we can actually extract investments from the developers who want to construct projects in your county or in your municipality. And public-private partnerships, of course, which is a story which is long in India but not really successful. So why hasn't it been successful, and what are some of the learnings in PPPs which we can adopt in India so as to make them effective? And various other value capture and tax increment tools are also available, which we can actually start deploying here through our municipalities. So if you just look at a quick look at the bond scenario in India, before 2010, it was a rather kind of a dismal scenario where just 1,700 crores was raised by 10 to 12 cities, and 300 crores was raised by the Karnataka Water and Sanitation Pooled Fund. Post Amrit and Smart Cities, we have to give the due where it's there. So 94 cities have been assigned credit ratings at smart cities, and 2018-19 alone, we have about 8 cities floating municipal bonds worth 3,200 crore. And Amravati has floated a 2,000 crore municipal bond. Pune has begun with a 200 crore as part of a 5-year bond program. So it's improving. The situation is looking optimistic in terms of municipal bonds, but certain innovations can still be experimented as far as the municipal bond story goes. So if you look at just a quick look at some of the innovative bonds that have been deployed internationally, there's a case study of California in 2006, where this is called a general obligation bond, where the bond is actually raised for financing certain specific utilities, like a park or a metro station, and the revenues, the tax payment from the citizens are actually pegged against the repayment of this bond. So the repayment of this utility infrastructure is actually pegged to the tax payments. So it's a rather safe instrument, but at the same time, it depends on the fiscal health of the municipalities. So if really aggressive municipalities like Ahmedabad or Pune Municipal Corporation could try out this kind of a general obligation bond. In the US, in this particular program, about $37 billion was raised through the GEO bond in California. So it's, as far as risk is concerned, is relatively low because it's pegged to the tax payments. So the next is a revenue bond, this is a bond which is pegged to the repayments that that particular utility itself generates. For example, this was about, it's in Mexico where EERE, which is energy efficiency, renewable methods which were tried out, various energy efficiencies methods were tried out in Mexico. And out of that, $20 million was raised through energy efficiency upgrades through revenue bonds. And 90% of the savings from the upgrades were used to pay off the bonds, and 10% was kept for their own activities. So this is another example of a bond, but this is pegged to the user fees. So if the asset is really strong and if the revenue generation capabilities are assured, then this is a good method of raising revenues. So a green bond is again another interesting example of a bond which can be raised for financing green infrastructure projects, but it's again ahead of its time, and it is done today internationally also only through the support of ADB and World Bank. Then if you look at user fees, a case study of Toronto. Now Toronto ran a budget deficit of about $500 million at one point of time. But in Canada, it's not allowed that municipalities fall below the benchmark of revenue and fall below the break even. So they had to really scurry around for raising revenues. And the various innovative methods through which they did was parking fee through phone or online methods, charges for setting up a new home for about $50 they charged every citizen for setting up a new home. Then subscribing to city-run programs, just by charging citizens for subscribing to city-run programs, they raised about $397 million of revenue. So this is how they came out of their budget deficits. But this again, the pitfall is that below poverty line citizens can be actually left out of such programs, and so that is a risk that the municipalities will run, losing the popularity among the citizens. Dedication requirement is another interesting tool wherein private developers are asked to bring in some innovative smart city solution in lieu of a major development that they want to put up in the city. So for example, 1 acre of parkland for every 56 acres of non-residential gross acres of development is what is stipulated, and this is part of the zoning regulations, and it's made an integral part of the master plan. Douglas, Colorado, for example, they actually met their entire green targets through such dedication requirements. Linkage fee. Now, linkage fee is again an interesting instrument where developers are charged beyond 100,000 square foot of commercial development. They're actually asked to pay a fee, and that fee is actually escrowed to affordable housing or creating a job trust fund for the neighborhood. So this is again an interesting example of how we can actually dedicate investments or inputs from private developers. And this has to be made an integral part of the zoning regulations, only then it works effectively. But again, it's unpopular with the developers, so these are some things that we need to bear in mind. Now, public-private partnerships. Now, if you take the example of a county in US, Quincy, where they actually asked a private developer called Streetworks to do majority of the infrastructure there, and they bought this over from the private sector developers. So this shows the large amount of trust that they placed on the PPP developers. So which is something which in India we need to work on the trust deficit aspects as to how much role that we can assign to a private developer and how much role the public authority should actually play. So this is all about trust in India, about public-private partnerships not really working out effectively, because in the end, when there's a litigation, the entire blame goes to the private sector. So these are some things which we need to take into account to be more soft and to be more fair to the private developer that comes in the PPP arrangement. Now, for example, now another pitfall that we need to know about public-private partnerships is complete privatization also does not pay. For example, in Chicago, they privatized all the water meters, and in the end, parking meters, and in the end, the pitfall was they ran about $8.9 million in lawsuits. So these are something that we need to be wary of in public-private partnerships. Now, tax increment financing is an interesting tool where if there's a new investment that's coming in, for example, a Reliance or a Walmart that comes into the municipality, we could actually charge the property owners who benefit from this additional investment additional property tax. So it's called tax increment financing. And through tax increment financing, actually, you also give a lot of subsidies to the investment that's coming in to the Walmart or Reliance or such big players, because they actually generate a whole lot of sales tax revenue for the, because today it won't be relevant in India, but still they increase the investments for that particular area. So, so they give them incentives for increasing the investments and increasing the local economy, while also taxing those houses which actually benefited from these additional investments. Value capture instruments is again ahead of its times in India, although TDR is something that we have started experimenting with in Mumbai. Where transfer of development rights is being implemented rather successfully for slum housing, etc., where an additional FSI is given in another project for investing in upgradation of slums or redevelopment of slums. Latin America, actually 40% of the public works are actually funded through such value capture instruments such as betterment contributions or certificates of additional development potential. It's known to generate about $2.5 million in revenue, and because a rural to urban conversion actually multiplies the land by 400 times. So instead of giving away that benefit to the private developer, why don't you capture that increase in values? That is the philosophy behind value capture instruments. Yeah, so the short point is that there are a combination of tools that can be experimented for improving the financial health of local bodies and municipalities, but it's just about what tool you adopt where, or you could even adopt a combination of such financing tools to have a sustainable development of your city without forgetting long-term planning for the city. Yeah, thank you very much.